Happy Thanksgiving, everybody. It's Turkey Day. And today it's going to be Turkey Day in more ways than one.
You are Locked On MLB. Your daily MLB podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans, and welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast where we talk about all of Major League Baseball. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I'm an Emmy-nominated television producer who's been a baseball podcaster for well over a decade now, and I've just finished my fifth full season here at the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. Follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever the heck it's called now. And on Instagram, I am your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter, Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. And for all of you who listen every day, if you're going to post on social media, make sure to put the hashtag EverydaySully. Everyday Sully is the hashtag, so I know who's listening every single day. Well, I want to get right into today's show. I can't tell you how excited I am to have our guest on. This is a genuine friend of the podcast, a friend of the old Sully Baseball Podcast, and has also been here on Locked On MLB. She is a Division I basketball player. Like me, is a teacher. Like me, is a rabid baseball fan. But unlike me, is descended from a genuine Hall of Famer with his plaque in Cooperstown. Coming back to the show, I'm building you up right now. It's Vanessa Ivy Rose. Welcome back on Turkey Day. How are you doing?
Thank you so much, Sully. It's so good to be back. So good to see you.
It's so good to see you too, and I hope you and your family and everyone is having a wonderful day today. I'm not going to go over our origin, our friendship origin. I'll just recap it in a little bit. You are the granddaughter of Turkey Stearnes, who was one of the great Negro League players, primarily with the Detroit Stars, but also he played for other teams along the way. There was a little more fluid back then amongst the Negro Leaguers. And your family, posthumously of your grandfather, your grandmother and other members of your family started a really active campaign to make sure his legacy was honored in Cooperstown, which it was in the year 2000. And you and I became friends because I posted something about your grandfather many years ago. You commented on it, and that was, I think, 12 years ago. It was something crazy like that. And you and I have been friends ever since. So that's our origin.
That's right.
Yeah. Well, there's more to there. However, the Vanessa Ivy Rose empire is growing right now because I'm going to plug a couple of things here. And the second thing I'm going to plug is the main thing I want us to be talking about. First of all, available wherever you get your books on right here, Hall of Fame DNA, as written by Vanessa Ivy Rose. This is your book about your grandpa. And, oh, my God, let's go to the acknowledgments at the end.
There's something special in there, right?
What did you say?
There's something special in there, right?
Yeah, you acknowledge me. You give me a nice thanks and a nice, a nice acknowledgement. I was really not expecting that. Really moved. But here's the really moving thing. You put me ahead of Prince.
And that's not easy to do if you know me, right?
Prince, okay? Okay, where do I rank up there? It's the only time I'll ever beat in terms of height and where I ended up in your book. It's the only time I'm ever going to beat Prince in anything. But here's the other thing I was really blown away by. I'm going to hold up my phone here. A wonderful podcast series called Reclaim the Forgotten League, which is, you're not in it. You are the host of it. You are the narrator of it. You take us on this wonderful journey. It's 6-part episodes. I was tearing up in episode 5, FYI. I found the bottom lip quiver, a little bit. It was a little. I was pulling a little bit of a little bit of that when I was listening to episode 5.
You're not the only one.
Oh yeah, but it is the story of your grandfather, but it's also the story of the Negro Leagues as a
Yes.
whole.
Yes.
Using your grandfather as kind of a through line, but
Right.
a lot of it is stuff that if you know nothing about the Negro Leagues, you're going to come away from this wanting to deep dive into it left and right. So I'll shut up for a second.
I
Why
love
don't
it. You're doing well. Keep going, Sully.
I know. Okay, that's it for our show.
That's our time.
No, but it was a wonderful series. I listened to all 6
Thank
episodes.
you.
Oh
Thank you.
yeah,
That means a
yeah.
lot
Like I
coming
was
from
going to
you.
miss this, and I would have listened to it if I didn't know you.
Oh.
But tell us a little bit about how you got involved in this project, and and where. Tell us also a little bit how you went on a journey as well in the making of of that show.
Yeah, for sure. Everything happens for a reason. As you mentioned, grandma has been advocating for Grandpa Turkey for many, many years, right? And she's no longer with us, but we decided as a family we need to make sure that we kept it going because there's so much more to talk about beyond granddad just getting into the Hall of Fame. That was great recognition, but the story of the Negro Leagues is so vast and people only really know about Jackie Robinson, right? And so that recycled story becomes the danger of a single story. Insert why the podcast obviously is so important. And so through this advocacy, I've been writing a lot of articles about granddad. That's how I met you too, looking at the internet, researching, talking to all these historians, all these amazing people who've been doing some great work for decades. And our family has been interviewed quite a bit in the
Mm,
past, it's just been picking up more and more over the course of the past decade. And so these data journalists over at ABC, ABC's 538, they have a website where they were comparing Negro League stats to Major League stats. And
mm.
the findings were so shocking that they were like, you know what? This could shake up the way that we view baseball and it could shake up the way that we view history. So they ended up sending 2 producers out to Detroit to talk to Ron Teasley's family, a 96-year-old
Mhm.
living Negro leaguer,
Right.
and also, one of a few that's still living, which is such a blessing to still have him. And then also they wanted to talk to Turkey Stearnes' family. So it went great. We hit it off. And to be honest, one of the producers was like, you know what? How would you like to host this thing? So, the rest is history from there.
You had mentioned this show to me privately when you were doing it, I think several months ago. And I really thought at first it was they were interviewing you. Like I'm in the HBO Curse of the Bambino documentary, and I thought it was gonna be like that. They was gonna feature you. And then like a couple of months later, it's like you dropped the trailer for it. And you're the host, you're the narrator. And I was like, I said they probably hit play record, and then 5 hours later they looked around. They said, like, "Oh, she's done talking," and we've got a full show. But it was you captured a lot of great things in it, like the like your was it your mother and your aunt were singing the national anthem at
Yeah.
Comerica Park, and
Yeah, they've been
you were
doing
on
it
the
for a while.
field. Yeah,
Yeah.
and but you had the recordings of you at Cooperstown in it was 2000, right? When he got in 2000,
Yes,
correct? Yeah,
2000, class of 2000. I was
that's right.
16.
16 years old, hanging out with John. You were like Johnny Bench and Sandy Koufax there, and you're talking to someone about your basketball team. That was
Right, right. Yeah, because I went to Barcelona to play, and, so we were talking about basketball
mhm.
while watching a tennis match in
In
Cooperstown.
Cooperstown.
Like, who does that? Who does So, I don't think
That's
anybody can beat that.
Now, one of the things you were like, this comes up a lot in the show is the concept of, and in fact, the final episode was a big chunk of it was about comparing the stats of the Negro Leagues. And for those of you who aren't familiar with that history, that's what they were called. Okay, that's
Mhm.
I'm not being. I have to say that sometimes because
Yeah,
this is how
me
little
too.
people know about it.
Right.
The Negro Leagues. Stats versus Major League Baseball stats, and also which games you include the league games, the barnstorming games, the exhibition games. And I will say, in a mild devil's advocate for not including the barnstorming, stats. This is in the off season when teams would just go around from basically barn to barn and basically a small town to small town and challenge teams of the local teams or be exhibition games. So it might be hard to compare those stats because you don't know necessarily the quality of the players that they were going up against. But it also brings up another philosophical point is comparing the Negro League stats to the Major League Baseball stats.
Mhm.
Well, the players in Major League Baseball weren't facing all the best players.
I'm glad you said that. Say it again, Sully.
Well, it's like, I have said that, this is not just me trying to be woke and PC and show how cool I am. I love baseball. And I wanted to see Oscar Charleston and, your grandfather,
Yes.
Ray Dandridge, Judy Johnson.
Yes.
You want to see the best players face off against the best players.
Absolutely.
So I want to see Joe DiMaggio in his prime face Satchel Paige in his prime. I want to see Dizzy Dean in his prime try to strike out your grandpa in his prime. Bill Dickey was a great Hall of Fame catcher. Mickey Cochran was a great Hall of Fame catcher. They never had to throw out Cool Papa Bell.
Yeah, and good luck doing that.
But also, on the other hand, Cool Papa Bell didn't run off of those guys. You want to see how they match up against each other.
Yeah, absolutely.
And you had a really kind of poignant thing in the first or second episode where you talk about how proud you were to see your grandfather. Your grandfather's plaque is at Comerica. He's in the Hall of Fame as well, but it's in Comerica Park in Detroit. And I also give the Tigers a lot of credit that they've seemed to be ahead of the curve in honoring the Negro Leagues and honoring players.
They do it every year.
And they've been doing it for many years. And I remember, I think it was your aunt was trying to elbow the players and get on the way. I want to meet Verlander, was trying to.
Yeah, Auntie Roz is going to have her way now. So, she was doing her thing. My mom's like going right up to Maglio, talking to him. She's like, come on over. I'm like, Bob, I don't think we can talk to them right now. But
those are good Tiger teams, too.
Right. Classic team.
But you made the point that his plaque that honors him at Comerica, and it's wonderful that they've done that, but it's outside.
Yeah.
If there's no bigger symbolism for your dad, who was a huge Tiger fan as well as being a star for the Detroit Stars, some of the players who they honor up there, Cobb, Gehringer, Mickey Cochran, played during segregation. So we're still honoring the people. If let's just your granddad, Satchel Paige, Judy Johnson, whomever it is, should be on the wall in Pittsburgh, in New York, wherever it was, because we still honor that history. Right. And that's the baseball fan tragedy of the Negro Leagues.
Yeah, and as you mentioned, the Tigers have tried to do some things to make sure that there's some visibility and representation of the Detroit Stars. They have a flag that was originally just going to fly during Black History Month, and fans chimed in and they were like, no, please leave this up all year. My mom also made a case for that. That I think was heard and was a big part of, moving that forward. So they do have like the flag there. They have Grandpa's plaque outside. As you mentioned, they're doing Negro Leagues weekend every year. But like you said, there's still room to grow within that, not just within the Tigers, but also throughout MLB. So we would like to see, that plan move forward and that representation continue.
You made a great point earlier in this conversation about the danger of it being a one-person story of Jackie breaking the color barrier. And even in the movie 42, which I think was a well-intentioned movie,
right? But
they emphasize, and you and I talked about this on a previous episode, they leaned a little too heavy on like Pee Wee Reese putting his arm around him, which could be apocryphal, or how supportive Branch Rickey was and how supportive Leo DeRocher was. And leaving out some parts like there were a few other players who broke the barrier that year. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see, like Larry Doby broke the barrier that year for Cleveland. Wouldn't it have been interesting to see how did Jackie react to another one? But that goes away from the narrative of Jackie the Martyr. And also when they took the the restraints off of him, the story's always like he couldn't fight back and how brave he was. Well, that was only 2 seasons. The rest of the time, he fought back like crazy.
Yeah,
And
civil rights pioneer. Yeah. And when you talk about one person the whole time, then you don't have to talk about everyone else and all those stories that would come up that are going to raise more questions and have people diving even deeper into this rich history that will have people saying, we have a lot of work to do. So I think it's somewhat intentional that, we continuously hear the same stories over and over and over, recycled and repeated.
I want to bring up something that was brought up in, you'll forgive me, I've mixed some of the episodes. There's 6 episodes. They're all wonderful. Episode 5 is the one where you'll start to cry a little bit. But there was an when Jackie broke the barrier in 47, which, if I'm not mistaken, I may have gotten my my facts wrong, because I've read about this from several different books, but I believe Monty Irvin was the first person who was offered, because Monty Irvin was a bigger star and ticked many of the same boxes that Jackie ticked. And I think he was like, I don't want to be the first through that wall.
Right. Yeah. And coming back from, wasn't he in World War II?
Yeah.
And, dealing with PTSD and wanting to get back out on the field, to sharpen his skills before hitting MLB, which obviously would make sense. But yeah, there was definitely other people that Brand Tricky was talking to and considering. And
you brought up the fact that there was kind of an unofficial quota. It wasn't like Jackie's in, Jackie works, so therefore the floodgates opened and everyone suddenly had suddenly it was completely integrated. Right. That there's an article that I read, actually, when I was first starting to learn about the Negro Leagues in the 80s. There was, when you were but a baby, there was an article in the Sports Illustrated in 87 about Ray Dandridge, who was a Hall of Famer who fortunately got into the Hall of Fame before he died. Way too many Negro Leaguers got in posthumously. So thankfully he actually got in and got to be celebrated.
Yes.
And he got in before your grandpa did. But he was one of the greatest third basemen in the history of the Negro Leagues. And he was signed by the Giants, but he got buried in their minor leagues. And Willie Mays and Monty Irvin and Hank Thompson and DeRocher, who was the manager, who was ahead of the curve on a lot of things racially. He just wanted to win. He didn't care. But they had a hole at third base and a Hall of Famer in their farm system. And they're like, what are we doing? Just call Ray Dandridge up, who was in his 30s. He was not in his prime anymore, but still. And they didn't bring him up they didn't say because of our, we already have an all black outfield, but it was understood why he wasn't brought up.
Right. And that's one thing we talk about in the podcast too, is like that gentleman's agreement and these unspoken things that were heavily prevalent and obviously impacted the opportunity for Negro Leagues players to thrive. So I'm glad you listened to the podcast. You had that wealth of knowledge too that you can bring in with this.
I did. I've read about. My mother gave me a book when I think I was in high school. I read every baseball book I could get a hold of, and she gave me a book called "Only the Ball Was White."
Yes.
And I read that. I was in high school when I read that. It was around that same time, around 87, 88. And that was the first time I saw your grandfather's name. First time, like Budjum Wilson, all the great nicknames that were going around there. That was when I first read about Buck Leonard.
But never anything in school, right? Like you never read that book for school.
It's the same thing. There's only 2 people in the history of the civil rights movement. It was Rosa Parks and Martin Luther King. That's it. That was it. The only 2.
Right.
The only 2. No, Medgar Evers, who?
Yeah, exactly.
No, nobody else. And the Negro Leagues are a league that only Satchel Paige played in. Apparently, it was only Satchel Paige. It was just him going around. That was a fascinating thing. And I read about. I think they mentioned this in the Ken Burns documentary, but you mentioned this, or you alluded to this in your show, which was, yes, the integration of baseball was the right thing to do, but it also meant that it was the end. If you were a fringe player, that was it for you. But also, if you worked for the organization, if you were a ticket taker. Like it was a whole organization that primarily hired black people and became a part of the community. You had black general managers, you had black trainers, you had black, marketers. And now all of a sudden,
community thrive,
and it was it was an important part of each of these communities. And the Giants weren't going to hire a black GM. Right. They don't hire him now.
Right. I mean,
did I say that out loud? Did I say that part out loud?
I mean, speak on it. That's the thing. Is like
Al Campanis.
Yeah, it's not a story of the past, right?
No.
Right. That's why it's so important now. Is this story of baseball, and especially Negro Leagues baseball, is the story of America. Those two things intersect. So the more you learn about Negro Leagues baseball, the more you'll learn about history, but then you'll see, oh, that's how we got to where we are right now. Mm-hmm. And wow, what changes do we need to make? What advocacy do we need to do? What questions do we need to ask? What doors do we need to knock on so that we can create sustainable change for the future? So that's the beauty of the podcast. And I love that you're bringing up all the awesome episodes and then also how it ties in to where we are now. That's so important.
Well, and you did bring up the final episode. I think that was the final episode. We bring up the Adam Jones interview, and which is
tough, right?
You could have ended it with, because in episode 5, your grandfather dies, gets into the Hall of Fame. We hear his voice, right. And your grandmother says, does the Tony the Tiger thing. Says, I feel great, in front of Sandy Koufax and Hank Aaron.
Only my grandma would do that.
That's why I love her. I love her to death. And you could have ended right there.
Right.
Balloons fall from the ceiling. Everyone carries you around on their shoulders. But you don't. Right. You end it with episode 6, which basically says, we're not done.
Right.
And we're not done.
Right. Not even close to done. Especially with the 2020 announcement, which is a great announcement, right? But,
right.
And there was 3 years of silence. So, we need to know what's the plan moving forward. How can we make this inclusion of the stats happen? And then what happens after that? The Negro Leaguers have been announced as major leaguers. What does that mean? What does it mean that they're major leaguers? What is that going to look like? How is that going to translate? And how do we continue that?
And I was thinking about this. It says this was not mentioned in your show, but I was thinking about this, and I don't know the answer to this question. And maybe it's important sometimes to ask that. But there's a slight parallel that maybe we can look at as a precedent. When you get those lawyers rummaging through trying to get one ruling on their case?
Right.
The Federal League. There was, for 2 years, there was a third major league. Mm. And Wrigley Field was built for the Chicago Whales of the Federal League. And they went bankrupt. But major leaguers, including some Hall of Famers, jumped ship to the Federal League. Now, we have to take a look. Do we include those stats when we look at the players who played in the major leagues? Because if we do, then treat it, again, I'm talking like a lawyer here, treat the Negro Leagues like the Federal League. Treat it as, okay, it's not American League, it's not National League, but did we include the Federal League stats in that? If we do, then that's how we include them. And if it turns out that Josh Gibson had 800 home runs, it turns out he has 800 home runs. If it turns out that Satchel Paige won 500 games, then guess what he did? I don't know the answer. But right. I think that's one way, sort of in a sort of a cold, calculating, numerical way, to approach it, because that's what they're saying. It's not, they weren't part of the American League. They weren't part of the National League, but they were part of a league that we're acknowledging here.
Yeah, I think it's not going to be equal. And I think that's what fans keep thinking. And just anytime it's mentioned to the public, like people just keep thinking like, well, how are you going to do this? Because the Negro Leaguers didn't play in the major leagues. We know they deserve to be there, but what is it going to look like? And there's so much of this information that's lost to history. So how can we bring that back? But it's not going to be equal because they didn't play against each other. As you mentioned before, we would have loved to have seen Babe Ruth and Ty Cobb going up against Granddad, Satchel Paige, Cool Papa Bell, whomever else, right? But we can do things to make it equitable.
Right.
And looking at the historians that we have right now. We know Seam Heads is doing a great job. We know Baseball Reference, Elias Sports Bureau, all the amazing historians who help out with the Negro League stuff, and not really help out, that are leading the charge with the Negro League stats and keeping that history alive and making sure that I have had eyes on things that I never would have seen if they hadn't scoured through every newspaper from long, long ago, right? So we have all the resources right now to actually get this done. So I'm really encouraged to see that we can utilize these people to make it happen, and make it happen in a timely manner, because the pacing of this is so important. Like I said, we only have a few Negro Leaguers who are still living. As we mentioned before, give people their flowers now. So we have the resources. Let's get it done.
When I do my in memoriam video every year, and man, there's already a bunch of ones in this one, like Vida Blue and some really Brooks Robinson, and I always make sure I include anyone. The two that I make sure anyone from the Negro Leagues I get in there, and also anyone from the All American Girls Professional League, the League of Their Own, because we're losing them.
Right.
I mean, it's 2023. Those leagues folded in the 50s.
Right. We're celebrating. The poster.
I'm 51. I'm 51.
Right. His granddad started his career in 1923. We're celebrating the centennial this year. So I have him looking right over my shoulder right there. I love it.
By the way, I'm going to turn the Turkey Stearnes. I'm going to be posed like this the rest of the show, just so he's sort of looking over my shoulder right at you. This, by the way, this poster, courtesy of Vanessa Ivy Rose. It arrived in my mail, and I have it framed and hanging in my little wall of fame that I have here in the luxurious Locked On MLB studios in Pasadena, California.
That's an honor. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports story of the day with local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. By the way, I will just say this last thing here is I never want to have the definitive reason of why he was called Turkey. I love that there's everyone has a different reason. I want it to be like the origin of the Joker in the Dark Knight. It's different every time. That's right. I had to drop a movie reference on you because you and I.
I love that.
I know. Because you and I will go off on it. I know you.
I want more movie references.
I know, but I'm trying to keep this under an hour. But I love that, your grandma had one story, some ball player had another story, a writer had it. There's he was called Turkey. It's not now. And I kept thinking, oh, this is so great. I never want to know for sure. I never want to say this is definitive. Never.
That's kind of the story of the Negro Leagues too, right? It's like you hear so many different things, and then you're learning so many different things all the time. It's just you just keep going, and it keeps evolving, and there's just so much more that will pop up, and then you'll be like, whoa, oh, okay, I had no idea about this player or this team or this manager, and the little things that they did that weren't so little, right?
Yep.
Maybe those were little things to them, but they were actually great catalysts for the game of baseball, and then also for our world. So, like you said, the idea of Grandpa Turkey's name just being something that we'll never be able to definitively describe.
I love it. I love it.
Part of the greatness too, right?
Well, I'm thankful that you and I have had over a decade friendship, and that you and I will keep doing this again. I am going to give our Thanksgiving trivia question. Ooh. And I had alluded earlier that Jackie Robinson, while he was the first to break the color barrier in 1947, he wasn't the only player. He wasn't the only black player in 1947, and he wasn't the only black player on the Dodgers in 1947. You would never know that if you saw the film 42. What pitcher who became Jackie's teammate in 1947 was the first African American to play in the National League? Don't you answer it, Vanessa. It's put right down here in the YouTubes or if you're on Twitter or whatever the hell it's called now, at Locked On MLB Pods, or on Instagram. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball on Twitter. Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. Vanessa Ivy Rose, before I let you go, and have some more turkey and have some more stuffing and have some more
sweet potato pie. Come on.
Sweet potato pie. Okay. We got
collard greens. Let's go.
Cranberry sauce. I'm not big on the collard greens, but that's fine. My mom makes an Italian Thanksgiving, so there'll probably be some raviolis and an antipasto ahead of time, just like the Pilgrims had. But tell people where they can follow you and listen to the wonderful podcast that you are the star of.
Yeah, the podcast is available wherever you get your podcast. So you can go to Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Pandora, anywhere pretty much that you listen to your podcast. It's also on the ESPN 30 for 30 app, which is wild. So happy about that. Shout out to ESPN. You can follow me on everything. If you go to the Twitter handle that's below my name there, you can go to that. That's my personal one. I also have Hall of
did I put the wrong one down?
Oh, no, that's cool. That's cool. That you can go there too, because I definitely share and repost at Turkey Stearnes, which is Hall of Fame DNA. You can go there on IG, Hall of Fame DNA on Instagram too as well. And then I have a website, surprise, surprise, that's also called Hall of Fame DNA. So check those out, and I would love to hear from you all.
Well, celebrating Turkey Day with the granddaughter of Turkey Stearnes. And if you have a reason why it was named Turkey, please send it along, because we can't have enough of it. She's Vanessa Ivy Rose. This has been this episode of Locked On MLB. I am your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.